All right, this is the Big Douglas Show. That's the rapper Big Pooh. And our guest today is Jared Weiss from The Athletic. Jared, thanks for giving us a little time today.
Yeah, this is an honor.
So, Jared, I know that we just got through with free agency, and I had talked with you about maybe breaking down like how these trades happen from beginning to end. You said you had one in mind.
Well, hold on. Before I do that, I thought you were going to give me a chance to suck up to Big Pooh a little bit. I mean, I'm around NBA players for a living, so I can see, I can see Wilt Chamberlain walk by, be a little confusing because he's dead, but even I wouldn't feel anything. But if I'm around a member of Little Brother, I get, my blood starts boiling a little bit. My, heart starts beating a little bit. This guy is a huge part of my childhood and my turn. Actually, learning how to write really, from you and Fonte for the most part. Really, I learned more from you guys at MF Doom than I did from reading actual sports writers. So I owe you a debt of gratitude. And we were just talking about how I got this Get Back hoodie back in the Get Back tour about like 14 years ago. So I'm glad I held on to this all these years, just in case I had to break it out for the podcast one day in the future, of course.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm definitely honored, man. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
So talking actual NBA. So you wanted to talk about how the trade process works. And it's funny because there were a few really interesting ones that happened over the past week or so. I mean, a big one that I was reporting on with my colleague Sam Amick at The Athletic was the Aaron Gordon trade race, really. And so we broke that he requested a trade in, I think it was February. And so, that's more common than people realize. A trade request isn't always like what James Harden did, where you don't show up to the team and you're showing up, giving $1 million a little baby on the other side of the country when you're supposed to be at practice. That's not usually how it goes. Usually it's you go to the GM, whether it's you or your agent, and you basically tell them, listen, things just aren't working out here. I really think it's best. It's time for me to move on. So can you please trade me at, when the trade deadline comes up? Sometimes you give a list of where you want to go, stuff like that. Aaron Gordon was an interesting case because he just wanted to get out of Orlando. And to be fair to him, Orlando tried to trade him twice at like each. So basically the draft and the trade deadline, those are the two times where trades tend to get done. Those are like the two trade seasons. And they tried to trade him at each of those trade seasons. They actually got to the finish line on trades and the trade got out and they ended up not going through with it. So it's one thing if guys come up in trade talks. It's another thing when they literally get to the point that they think they're getting traded and then it doesn't happen. You can go through that once and you can still move forward from it, but going through that twice, it's at that point, it's like you got to move on from that relationship because you've shown multiple times. This isn't just a matter of we had an offer that we just couldn't turn down. This is kind of a pattern at that point where it's clear that we're looking to move on from you if we can make an upgrade. So he went to them and he said, please trade me. And it was misreported a lot that he wanted to go to a contender. He did not have to go to a contender. That was not his request. He was willing to go pretty much anywhere in the NBA if they would trade him because he would have a better opportunity with a fresh start there. But he especially wanted to go to like Boston, Denver, or Portland. He ended up going to Denver, which I think was the best scenario for him. But, in those talks, there were some teams that when they were trying to trade for him, they wanted him to commit to signing a contract extension. But the funny thing is the rules are set up that you're very limited on how much more money you can make in a contract extension. But if you hit free agency, you can make all the way up to the maximum. So there's no reason for him to sign an extension. So that took Houston out of the running. They actually pretty much had a deal done. And it was really just contingent on would he commit to his future to Houston, and he wouldn't do that when signed the deal. So they didn't want to make the deal, which is funny because they ended up making a way worse deal with Victor Oladipo anyway in the end. So Houston just completely blew it anyway. But so I think Denver and Boston both felt like if they bring him in here, he's going to be so happy here. We're really confident that we can keep him in free agency. So they were both willing to do the deal. And it was kind of basically just whoever would be willing to throw in the most draft picks would win the race. And obviously Denver was the one willing to do it.
Jared, I'm interested in, we obviously, you just told us how in this specific case, the Aaron Gordon deal, went down. What about in a situation like Kyle Lowry? he did the almost the farewell goodbye press junket after that game, and and so we all just assumed he wouldn't be with the Raptors come 3 p.m. on trade day, but here he is still with the Raptors. Can you explain kind of what you know of the thought process in going into not trading a player like Kyle Lowry at the trade deadline?
So everybody was shocked that they didn't trade him. I mean, there was a reason why he was doing all that stuff beforehand. Like everyone assumed it was going to happen. And I think it was as simple as that. The Raptors were holding pretty firm on wanting to get like a pretty good package of return. They wanted a few young rotation players. They wanted a draft pick on top of that. And, for Kyle Lowry with his talent level, that's an obvious decision to make that trade, except that he's about to hit free agency and he's going to have a really competitive free agency. So it's going to cost a lot of money. So I think a lot of teams are just feeling that, especially the top teams that were really in the race for him, like Philadelphia especially, I think they just felt like we could probably sign him or do a sign and trade for him in the offseason and get him that way and give up way less than we would give up now. And we're confident enough this year that we could win the title that we'd rather just wait. And so I think it was just that the teams that were in on Lowry felt that way. I know that the Lakers would have had the deal if they included Taylor Horton Tucker. I know it's come out that was a sticking point. What it actually was as simple as if they threw in Taylor Horton Tucker, the deal was done and Kyle Lowry would be a Laker, but they didn't want to give him up. I think they feel like we could probably sign Lowry this offseason somehow and not have to give up one of our prize young guys. And then Philly did the same thing with Tyrese Maxey, I think also.
You brought up the Lakers and it made me think of the Nets. And are these super teams and buyouts been creating what seems like easy contenders? Is that the future? I mean, is that where we're at now?
That's the past. It's been that way. I mean, this has been I've been covering the league for I think a decade now, and every single year, the top teams in each conference, basically, at least the big market ones, tend to sign a really good player at the end of the year. I mean, remember? No, I was going to use Anton Jameson when he went to Cleveland as an example, but I think they actually traded for him. But either way, every year this happens, and I know that's become a story because some anonymous GMs are complaining this year, but honestly, I think the impact this year maybe felt bigger because it was a lot of former all-stars on the move, but all these guys have been kind of washed up. Like Blake Griffin was like the worst player on the Pistons basically this year. Now he's turned it on when he went to Brooklyn, and we'll see what happens with LaMarcus Aldridge and Andre Drummond. But like it was like those guys were playing really poorly, and nobody wanted to trade for them, and that's why they ended up on the buyout market. So I agree. I think it's always been an issue, and there should be some sort of reform done where maybe like if you're already spending the X amount of money on your payroll as is, you might have to pay an extra tax to acquire that player, something like that, where it's like specific to guys that got bought out during the season, because we already have the luxury tax. But they're probably, because like right now, the Lakers signing Andre Drummond, it costs them like $1 million, even with the luxury tax that they're paying. I'm pretty sure they're paying the luxury tax. So that's not that much, that doesn't really matter to them. But if you made it cost like $7 million, then, that would maybe make them want to go for somebody else.
Yeah, we had a team decide at the deadline to tear it all down in the Orlando Magic. And then you have teams, I think especially because of this play-in tournament style thing we have this season where they, it's like, I don't know if we're quite sellers yet. But do y'all get, as someone who reports on the NBA, do y'all get kind of advance notice when you feel a team is going to just say, okay, we're just going for a rebuild versus a team that's want to stick around the fringes and see if they can sneak into the playoffs, or in this case, the play-in tournament?
I mean, like there's no press release that's sent out to us that says, hey, we're going to rebuild. But I mean, I have sources that are telling me this is what we're hearing. But the funny thing is Orlando is a great example where coming into this trade deadline, we were expecting them to trade Evan Fournier and Aaron Gordon, and maybe they would trade Vucevic if they got some sort of like crazy offer they couldn't pass up on. But generally, Orlando's plan was to keep Vucevic for this year and then see how good they could be next year when they have Jonathan Isaac and Markel Fultz back healthy. And they also probably have like a top draft pick and they have a really good rookie. So I think they wanted to see how good they would be then, and then decide to trade Vucevic in the middle of the season if if they weren't good enough. But then I guess they must think Wendell Carter is going to be incredible. I'm sure they wanted to draft Wendell Carter over Mo Bamba a couple years ago, and that must be why they wanted to make that trade, because what they got in return, Chicago is probably going to be picking in the middle of the first round, but it's not like they got like unbelievable draft picks that would really force them to do it now. So I'm guessing they decided that Wendell Carter is going to be great, and that's why they wanted to make that move. And that's what triggered them to go for that full rebuild. Because, trading away Aaron Gordon and Evan Fournier, that's not a huge rebuild for them because those guys are like solid, but they have other guys that they want to replace them already. But trading away Nick Vucevic for a young guy in Carter who hasn't really done much yet, that's, I think, where it's a real rebuild.
Well, it's hard to talk about, but we are Wizards fans here. What does the league feel about Tommy Shepard? I ask that because Wizards fans everywhere are begging for Masai Ujiri. So I'm just curious where he stands and how people perceive him.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, guys. If I knew you were Wizards fans, I would have brought some flowers or something. But I mean, I'm excited about this Wizards team because there's a lot of like good young players there. They don't have the guys, to really win in the future, unless obviously Beal sticks around, which I would be shocked if he did at this point. But so I haven't heard anything negative out of Tommy Shepard yet. They haven't really made any kind of crazy bad moves. He's drafted pretty well. Rui Hachimura was a pretty questionable pick, and I think Rui's looking really good, and he's adjusting to his role really well. I really like Deni Avdija, so I thought they hit that one out of the park. What's been kind of weird is a couple of the guys that they just traded away, like Troy Brown, Isak Bonga, who someone doesn't really play much anymore either. Those are guys that I thought were really good. It would be a part of their foundation of kind of their good bench players. And for some reason, they just haven't really played that much this year, and then kind of got traded away for nothing. So unless Chandler Hutchison gets healthy and is good. But so, I think Washington is kind of just looked at one of those teams that's kind of stuck in the middle right now because they have two all-stars who are performing pretty well, and still the team isn't competitive. So it's not like they can do much more to get better right now. So they probably have to do a big rebuild. And actually, it probably makes sense for them to just, unless they can pull off some sort of huge trade to bring in another superstar, it's actually probably better for them to trade Bradley Beal at this point and just kind of start over.
What does that say about the two superstars that they're not able to produce more wins?
I don't know, because I watched them play and they're both pretty awesome. So, I mean, Beal's been incredible offensively this year. Russ is having that thing he does every year where he's horrible, and then he has like 2 months where he's like an MVP level player. And so the big question is that going to hold up? Last year that didn't hold up, and then obviously the pandemic hit. We'll see if it holds up this year, but he just had like one of the best triple doubles in NBA history. And I know triple doubles don't mean really much with him, but when you pull off that, I think that's definitely noteworthy. So I think it's really just that there's a huge gap between the players that are ready to compete now and then they're young guys, and they don't really have that middle ground. But just having like a good starter that's in their prime is a smart two-way player. They just don't have that kind of balance yet.
I think yes, last night was a good example of what you're speaking of, where
Exactly.
Russell Westbrook played out of his mind and nobody else could throw a rock in the ocean. Like, that was a great example of that. I'm interested on your thoughts, not necessarily on the Stephen A. Russell Westbrook thing that's going on right now, but just how people view players like Westbrook, in that they believe he has these numbers averaging a triple double, but they don't believe it's winning basketball. And as we just discussed with the Wizards, when you look at the team, there's a clear distinction between Russell Westbrook, Bradley Beal, and then what else they have on the roster. Like, it's tiers between those players. Like, what do you say to the fact that he plays this brand of basketball where he averages triple doubles? Some say, stat stuffing, but it's not producing winning basketball.
So I actually didn't hear what Stephen A said, but I saw Russ's response to it. So I kind of have an idea what Stephen A said. It's pretty rare Stephen A says anything that's really worth talking about anyway. He tends to create his own reality distortion and then operates off of that. I know at the end of the day, Russell Westbrook is I think Russell Westbrook is better than what his stats show, which is funny because his stats, if you look at his total stats, they're amazing, but his efficiency numbers are horrible. And his total stats are amazing because he plays out of control nonstop. And there's a great example is do you remember that game years ago where Steph Curry on national TV, he had that half court buzzer beater over Russ to win it? It was like a middle of the year regular season game, but it was like one of the best regular season games ever. I remember at the end of that game, Russ took like 7 shots in the last 3 minutes. Half of them were like air balls off the top of the backboard and stuff like that. 3 of them were unbelievable that only he can pull off. But the thing is, it's like he's just gonna keep running against the wall over and over and over again. And sometimes it's gonna work, but I think it works less than it actually does work out. And so at the end of the day, unless he's having a great night, he tends to have a negative impact because he's throwing up so many wild shots, making so many turnovers, getting over aggressive or falling asleep on defense compared to like the times where he actually makes good plays on defense. That's just kind of always been it with Russ. It's, I cover the Celtics and we have Marcus Smart in Boston, and Marcus Smart's kind of the same way. Everyone I talk to says that Marcus Smart makes a positive impact as far as like talking to like statisticians and stuff like that. But you see, he will, he'll take like 3 threes in the final minute of the game. Some nights he hits all 3 of them. Some nights he misses all of them. And you have to kind of just ride the wave with him. And Russ does the same, but at an even more extreme level, probably at a level no one's ever done in NBA history.
Jared, what are the timeline on some of the big injuries that are out, the Kevin Durant, LeBron James? Do we know when those guys might be ready to go? Anthony Davis?
It's funny. Kevin Durant, we really have no idea how long he's out for, because I think he was only supposed to be out for a couple of weeks, and that was like 2 months ago or something like that. It's been forever. And it makes sense because it's a hamstring, right? And the guy just tore his Achilles, so you can't mess around with anything on the back of his leg. And they're still winning, and they traded for James Harden, so they don't really need him. You might as well just like sit out till the last week of the regular season, basically, and they'll still be the number 1 seed anyway. As far as LeBron was ruled out for about 3 weeks with a high ankle sprain. That would be like the quickest return from a high ankle sprain that we've ever seen anyone pull off. We know that LeBron is getting steroids every single morning to make himself big and strong. So maybe I'm just kidding. But LeBron does get more treatment than pretty much anybody out there. So maybe he's able to somehow recover quicker than most people can. But LeBron's 36 now, I think,
36.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're 36 years old, why would you rush back from a high ankle sprain? Like you're like, it's amazing that you've been this healthy for this long. Like, why mess with that? Your team doesn't really need it unless they're going to literally fall down to the 11th seed, which is not going to happen. They don't need it. The Lakers can be the 10th seed. As long as LeBron and AD are there, they're still going to have a chance to make the finals. It doesn't really matter. And then AD is supposed to have another evaluation in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I think, from now. And at that point, there's a good chance he'll be cleared to play and he'll actually return. So it looks like he's pretty close to returning.
What about Joel Embiid?
I actually have no idea on that one. I think he was ruled out for 4 to 6 weeks or something like that when he was out. So I think feels like it's been 3 to 4 weeks at this point. So maybe he's coming back next week or so, but I haven't heard an update on him in a while.
Okay.
What happened with Kemba Walker this year? Kemba's my man, but he's been down this year, right? Is that because of the injury?
Trust me, I spend every day trying to figure it out. He has knee tendonitis. They haven't really said it publicly, but like it's obvious that he has knee tendonitis. And so that bothered him last year. He tried taking time off and doing a rehab program, and it didn't really work. But it also was kind of rushed a little bit. So this year they had more time before the season to do that process. And he missed like the first month of the season or so. And he came out and he was really rusty, and he started to find his groove and was having a bunch of 20-point nights in a row. And I thought that would kind of, it would be like an improvement, steady improvement. And then he would kind of be back to normal. And for some reason, it just hasn't happened that way. And that's even with him sitting out back to backs. He doesn't play that second game. And for some reason, he just still isn't consistent. And it could be possibly that the Celtics offense has been kind of a mess this year, but he's getting a lot of the same looks every single night that he usually takes. It's usually he comes over that screen 30 feet up, pulls up from 25 feet, and it's money. Going downhill and doing that snatch back pull up from 18 feet, or getting all the way to the rim and doing that kind of double pump where he gets the contact and then puts up the floater. Those shots have always been kind of his go-to shots, and we just haven't really been seeing him doing that consistently this year. So there's something that's still off.
With the Celtics, I'm interested in, I believe at the trade deadline, they traded for Fournier, another wing player. They have a glutton of wing players.
Oh, yeah.
But the player I feel they really needed was an old friend who was sitting in Oklahoma City, who's no longer playing this season, and Al Horford. And they had this huge trade exception created by the Gordon Hayward trade to Charlotte. Why do you think Danny didn't attempt to make the move to bring in someone like Al Horford, who's needed, as opposed to a Fournier who appears to be extra compared to, they have two of the best young wings in the NBA already in Jaylen Brown and Tatum?
I think that they probably needed Fournier more than Horford, actually, because they got Rob Williams playing really well, and they want to continue to develop him and give him those minutes. So Horford was probably going to be either starting ahead of Williams, which would be bad for them long term, or he would be the backup center. And you don't need a backup five as much as you need a backup wing. And really, this offense has just been missing Gordon Hayward. They were missing a tall wing that can shoot, pull up in the mid-range, can get to the rim, can pass pretty well, and can defend decently. And Evan Fournier is kind of like a slightly poor man's version of Gordon Hayward. He's actually a pretty similar player. So I think for them, they felt it's pretty clear our offense needs someone that can move the ball and can actually, like, when the ball comes their way, make a move or actually shoot it, because they've been playing all these guys that are like wings, but they're not good on the ball, like Shemi Ojale, who is a decent spot up shooter, but doesn't really do much else for you on offense, or their rookie Aaron Nesmith, who airballs half the shots that he takes. He's just not ready yet. So I think they're actually going to benefit more from getting that sixth man in Fournier than they would from getting Horford, as far as fixing that specific problem with their offense that I think is their biggest problem. But we do know Al Horford is really great in the Celtic system, and it would be great if they could bring him in. But he's old and is getting paid like $26 million for a few more years. I think they would have just rather have a younger guy who's in his prime in Fournier, who they're also probably not going to have to pay as much than, somebody who's in his mid 30s and declining.
Did I see you write or say that Drummond had originally planned on coming to Boston instead of LA?
Yeah, it wasn't quite, but it was down to the Celtics and the Lakers. And I was reporting originally that the Lakers were the front runners and the Knicks were heavily involved. And when I started putting that out, I had a lot of sources telling me actually the Celtics are probably in the lead right now. And at the very least, it's 50-50. So as I was talking to sources throughout that day on Saturday, trying to break the actual signing, it was going back and forth. In the morning, I was being told the Celtics are the favorites. By the afternoon, I was being told the Lakers are the favorites. By like the early evening, I was being told it's pretty much 50-50 and he's gonna put out his decision tomorrow. And then I got word by, I think, like 7:00 on Saturday evening that it looks like he's going to the Lakers. I only had one source saying that, so I didn't put it out. Woj put it out right after I heard from that source. It sounded like the agent was just giving it to Woj because the agent actually told Woj to use his name when he formally announced it the next day. So I think Drummond was going back and forth on it.
I'm sorry. How many text messages are you getting on a day like that?
That day I probably had a couple hundred, I would guess. I'm probably in active text conversations with 8 to 10 sources, then talking to my editors, a couple other reporters that I work with, Shams Charania, who's the big newsbreaker, obviously, and Sam Amick on a lot of our reporting at The Athletic. So, I'm probably in active conversation with around 10 people. So, that's That's a couple hundred on days like that. You know, on a day like today, I probably texted like 3 people basically. You know, it's a pretty calm day today. But yeah, when deadline season happens, you know, like my phone died, I think like 5 times that day. So I had to, you know, keep recharging it over and over and over.
Wow. Jared, I'm interested. Who do you see as the final 2 teams or the top 2 teams out of the East and the top 2 teams out of the West when this is all said and done?
I think the conference finals will be Brooklyn over Philly. I think Brooklyn's the best team probably in the NBA. And then in the West is harder. I mean, I love how Utah's playing, but they've come down a little bit to earth in the past month or so, and they don't have an elite creator off the dribble in crunch time. Although Mitchell probably could be that guy for them compared to the other teams like, you know, Kawhi with the Clippers, LeBron and AD with the Lakers. You know, and then we'll see if Devin Booker and Chris Paul can elevate to that level. But so, you know, it's probably Utah and then one of the LA teams. I would probably pick the Lakers as the other team, just because we know how much better LeBron is in the playoffs. And I think we're seeing AD gets better in the playoffs too. And the Lakers have been getting by this year with barely either of those guys, basically.
What do you think the status of Brooks for the Wizards is? Do you think he'll make it through the season and get fired after the season, or Lord help us if he gets another extension?
I mean, I don't see any reason to fire him now unless they have a coaching candidate on their bench that they want to try out and give him some run at the end of the year. I mean, how far out of the 10 spot are they right now? Like 3 or 4 games?
I think it's 4 games.
Okay, so let's see. So there's about 30 games left this year. So they have about 10 more games before it makes sense to fire him. You know, at that point, if you have 20 games left in the season, you're still 4 or 5 games back. There's a chance that you could get really hot and pull it off, but in all likelihood, you're probably not going to. And that gives you enough time to get a coach in there and give them a lot of time to kind of, you know, get a feel for the roster and actually start to show some momentum. So that could be what they end up doing. I'd be surprised if Brooks stays, because even though Brooks is like he's always been a solid coach, and he's, you know, I think he squeezed a lot of juice out of that orange there in Washington, but it's like he's been there forever and they just haven't really gotten to the top tier in the East. And I think it makes sense to just try a new coach who's going to do something different at that point.
Jared, with the big fish in Giannis off the market this off season, do you see it being a active off season? And I know there's always transactions, but name wise, an active off season.
So that's a funny thing is, so Kawhi is on the market and it's possible he leaves. Nobody has ever any idea what he's going to do. And I guess it probably has to do with how the season finishes for the Clippers. You know, if the Clippers flounder out in the first round, then yeah, maybe he does have to look elsewhere. But otherwise, I think he's going to probably stay with the Clippers. And then after that, most of the names that I thought were going to be really exciting, they're pretty much all off the market at this point. So then you're really looking at guys like John Collins and Lonzo Ball, who could be really good pieces for a contender. You have to pay them like a fortune, basically, because their teams are, you know, have restricted rights you can match on them. And then there's those older guys like Kyle Lowry, obviously is going to hopefully leave Toronto, just because like Toronto should be kind of rebuilding. I'd like to see him in another situation where he can contend. It would be really cool to see him in Miami. And then Victor Oladipo is honestly the most interesting one, because Oladipo has kind of turned into kind of like an empty stats kind of guy over the past couple of years, and his defense is just not nearly where it was before. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, now that there's so many teams with cap space, whether he's still going to get a huge contract offer or if it's going to be kind of a disappointing market for him.
Follow-up question. You said Victor Oladipo, and that just rang something off of my mind. Why did the Houston Rockets in that trade, that James Harden trade, instead of bringing back Karis LeVert, decided to trade him to Indiana to bring back Victor Oladipo? Like, what were they thinking?
Who says they were thinking? And Jared Allen was probably the best player in that trade besides Harden, and he didn't even go there. I mean, it's insane. I think Houston blundered that so badly. That was a really huge mistake. It's possible that those picks on the back end they get from Brooklyn turn out to be great, like it happened for the Celtics. But for the Celtics, when they did that Brooklyn trade, they were trading away Paul Pierce and KG, who were kind of at the end of their careers, and that whole thing blew up real quick. And it was also a bunch of kind of semi-stars and Darren Williams who were, weren't really they didn't have a history. This Brooklyn team is Kyrie and KD, who are best friends, and James Harden, who they also are close with and have known forever. And Kyrie and Harden are in their primes. So this Nets team is not going to fall apart for a long time. They should stick together for 4 to 5 years probably and be contending that whole time. So the possibility for Houston getting a great draft pick at all out of that trade is kind of not that good, and getting multiple great draft picks out of it is not that good either. So I feel like they just kind of completely blew it on the deal. And then as far as the LeVert thing, maybe the whole process of how it came out that LeVert had the was a kidney or liver issue. I can't remember which one.
One of the two. Yeah.
I think it was kidney, right? Maybe they knew about that and they were like, we don't want to bring in a player with some sort of obviously organ issue because that could be a career ender. So maybe that's why they decided to do that. But I think it just seemed more like they were willing to take a bet on Oladipo more than they were on LeVert. And we saw how much it failed because they ended up trading Oladipo for almost nothing in the end.
They
Jared,
traded.
I saw this morning that the NFL is proposing rules for the more COVID vaccines, I guess, that are through the building, the more contact they'll be allowed to have and do extra things. Has the NBA talked about anything like that? Not necessarily, asking the players to get them or forcing them to, but rewarding teams that do more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's they're not giving them any sort of incentive or bonus, but I mean, I think it's just a practical matter that once you get vaccinated, you don't need to take the precautions you did beforehand. So yeah, when teams get their players vaccinated, they no longer have to follow a lot of the protocols that they did before. So that should motivate everyone to get vaccinated. I know that there are some players that don't want to get vaccinated. I mean, I have my apprehensions too, but you can do enough research and talk to enough doctors to understand this whole vaccination process and understand why it's safe. So there isn't really any reason for anybody not to do it.
Jared, we thank you for coming on. I thank you for wearing that hoodie. You just Northampton, Mass. You brought back some memories there. Please let the people know where they can find you and what you have coming up next.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm at The Athletic covering the NBA and the Celtics there. I host our morning show, The Daily Ding. So I'm on there Mondays and Friday mornings. So go subscribe to that pod, subscribe to The Athletic, and trying to think of big projects I have coming up. Actually, I have a really interesting project on the story behind Tom Brady's social media, all the videos he makes, all that kind of stuff. I'm actually friends with the guy that does most of that stuff. So we're working on a story that I think is going to be really interesting for people if you're looking for more stuff behind the scenes on how these players' brands get established.
Nice.
And The Athletic is giving away the subscriptions again, right? $1 a month, I think I saw.
It really is ridiculous how cheap it is. People, I think a lot of people don't realize when you subscribe, you don't just get to read what I'm writing. You literally get to read everything that we cover, from F1 to women's college basketball to probably middle school golf somewhere in Kansas or something like that. I mean, we're pretty much everywhere. I think we have 450 journalists out in the field or something like that. So you get all that for $1 a month. It's pretty much the biggest sports news network that exists in the world. So I was a subscriber before I worked there, and I definitely still read pretty much everything there now that I can.
I'm a subscriber, and it's well worth it.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Well worth it.
You can
if you got a message for Fred Katz you want me to deliver, I'd be more than happy to. I talk to him pretty much on a daily basis.
Tell him he's welcome on the show anytime.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure he'd love to. Before I lose you guys, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So I was trying to think what's the one question I want to ask you, but I guess it's more of a creative question of something I struggle with myself. When you've created a great body of work that you're really proud of and you feel like is your kind of crown jewel, nobody wants to make that and then be like, that was my peak, I'm done. I can't do anything better than that ever again. So I'm wondering, how do you kind of go about continuing to create, continuing to evolve, and not feel like you're kind of trapped in that moment of you felt like you did your best work previously?
I view it through the prism of an athlete. I look at all my work. I look back at all my work like game tape, game film, if you will, and I search for ways to improve. So whether that's inflection, whether that's using different words, breaking out of thesauruses, or different perspectives on, what content that I'm focusing on, concept. So I just always try to look for ways, even if it's something minute that the average person might not catch. I look for ways to get better, so the next time that isn't the weak part of my game anymore. So it's like going to work out in the off season, say, okay, I need to work on my jumper. Okay, I need to work on my 3-pointer. Okay, I need to work on my handles. Okay, I need to work on my fadeaway, or whatever it is. So I think me looking at it like that, it's hard to see something as my best, because I believe I always have better in me.
It's funny because when I can't read my own work, I hate it. I hate listening back to myself. I feel like it's terrible when I hear it. And I look back on my kind of my older work. I've been lucky enough. I've won a couple of awards in my career so far. And I look back on even the works that won those awards, and I'm like, this isn't even nearly as good as a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now. Like, I can't believe I even got recognition for this. I feel like it's kind of like I've improved so much since then. And like, I think of like the minstrel show, even though it's 16 years old now or something like that.
All
But
I
that's
hear is
still
mistakes. All I hear is
and
mistakes.
that's like one of the best albums that's like ever come out in the genre. So yeah, okay, that's interesting.
I cringe when I listen to old music, especially that old. I cringe when I hear it, because I just hear things I could have done better, as opposed to what was great about this album. Like, make no mistake, I definitely love the album. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't do anything over or anything different. But listening to it with my ears now, I hear the mistakes. And even once like Made a Little Watch, I haven't listened to that album since 2020 sometime. And it's one of them things where I've heard it so much in the creation of it that I don't like to revisit it often. But when you do go back, all I hear is the mistakes. And it's like, see, I could have said this. I could have did this like this. But I think that's part of the process of still striving to be better. No matter how many accolades or things you've accomplished, you're still striving to be better and improve upon what you're doing, and be better at your craft. So I think that's a good sign.
That's good. That's good. And yeah, I know, like, when it's your own art that you've created, you built it from the scratch. So you saw it in its kind of raw form. You've seen how you kind of layered it up to the finished product. So you can really see all the steps. And I think it's easier to see all the mistakes along the way. While, like, for me, I heard the album and it was just like, it was already perfected by the time I heard it. So, I only got it as like the complete package. I didn't have any kind of options or like feeling of like where they could have gone this way or that way. And so I think it's harder for me to kind of see what flaws that you see in it.
Absolutely.
Also, that it was also pretty good, which also helps too.
Thank you. Yeah, life of a writer. It's a tortured life. It's
really
definitely a tortured life, but I wouldn't do anything else in the world.
I appreciate you. That really helps me get more confidence as I try to kind of learn how to be a writer, because I've been doing this for a long time and I still have no idea what I'm doing.
Hey, that's how we all feel. That's how we all feel. Jared, once again, appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. Enjoy the rest of the season. Hope you have your chargers ready for this off season.
Oh, I will. Thanks, guys. This is the first podcast I'll ask. I didn't even like think for a second to say yes to. I mean, that was an automatic yes. So this was awesome. Thanks, guys.
No doubt. Have a good one. Feel like the old man.
All right, perfect.
All right, that hoodie. That's crazy.
Yeah, I'm so glad I held on to this.
Nice.
It doesn't fit me anymore, but I'm gonna do some more sit-ups after I'm done here to make sure it actually can zip all the way up. But it's so soft, and I remember I wore this like every day for like a year straight afterwards. It's still like in good shape. It's a good quality merch.
Nice
But
quality.
Can you still see
Yeah.
the autograph at the top?
It's really faded, but it is still there.
That's crazy.
That is really cool.
I don't even have that hoodie. Man,
That's so cool. Yeah, I think it says "One Love" from Pooh and Fonte.